Just like the 28 and 35mm Simeras before it, Thypoch's new 50mm f1.4 has an impossible task. I've taken over 10,000 frames with the Leica 50 Lux. It's my favorite Leica lens of all time, and at first I thought Thypoch's 50mm Simera was designed to compete against it. I realized its real competition is Leica's legacy. So did Thypoch pull it off? Have they started a new legacy? The 50mm f1.4 Simera is on loan from Thypoch. I don't get to keep the lens, no money exchanged hands, and I have final edit. Hello, I'm Jack, scientist, street photographer. This is Bokeh Therapy. This channel can at times, to put it eloquently, have too much blah. So today I'll cut to the chase. Is the Thypoch 50mm Simera sharp? My Leica 50 Lux has more detail at f1.4, but there's not much in it. But the fact that the 50 Simera is a little less sharp can strangely be a positive for a segment of Leica shooters out there. Their main critique of the 50 Lux ASPH is that it can be too clinical. It lacks some of the artistic Leica glow found in the older f1.4s or the much more expensive 50 Noctiluxes, so it can be a little harsh for portraits. Despite having a similar optical formula, it seems, 8 elements and 5 or 6 groups, a floating element designed to control focus shift and aberrations, the 50mm Simera splits the difference. A bit more contrast, a little less sharp than the 50 Lux, but other than being more flattering for some portraits, the Simera does have 4 advantages. The first advantage, close focus. Its minimum focusing distance is 0.45 meters, the same as the newer Leica 50 Lux version 11728, and closer than the 0.7 meters of my older 50 Lux. Shooting wide open at 50mm less than half a meter away from the subject will melt any background away. If you really wanted a Leica 50 Lux, is close focus enough to push you to the newer version 11728. This 50 Lux has the same optical formula as my older 50 Lux, and to me close focus ability matters more on a wider lens at 28 or 35. The IQ is close, with a hint of its own flavor. There is more vignetting on the Simera. It could just be a lack of a lens profile in Lightroom. If you shoot my 50 Lux and the Simera from the same distance wide open, both have some cat's eye bokeh in the corners. The Leica 50 Lux is just a little bit smoother. The Simera looks a little busier, more so bubbly. I'd be happy with either result on a portrait shoot if bokeh is what I'm after. The Simera holds its own. Henri Cartier-Bresson was a once-in-a-generation surrealist. His unparalleled ability to extract visual meaning through geometry and whimsy was harder than drawing blood from a stone for less talented artists. But Robert Capa would be right there to capture the blood on that stone. His no-holds-barred frontline approach to combat photojournalism found broad acclaim more quickly. At 25, he was already described as the greatest war photographer in the world. So when they both started covering the Spanish Civil War in 1937, Capa was the mentor and HCB the mentee. Capa's biggest piece of advice followed HCB for the rest of his life. Beware of labels. You will be labeled as the little surrealist photographer, and you will never be able to get rid of them. Based on reputation and price, Leica lenses should have the best handling and build quality, but the Simera's second advantage is that it's built different, if not better, than the 50 Lux. Better is subjective, so I should say it feels more modern in its haptics. Focus throw from minimum distance to infinity is about the same on both lenses, but the Simera's crescent-shaped focus tab, there's more resistance. To me, it feels more precise. The Simera's aperture ring can be declicked, useful for racking exposure in video. Just like the 28 and 35 Simeras, focusing happens internally. The lens doesn't move in or out, potentially better protected against the elements, which also helps with focus shift if the front of the lens stays in the same position. It comes with a rectangular lens hood. It's interchangeable with the 28mm Simera's lens hood, corner cutout, minimal viewfinder blockage, and unlike Voigtlander, it's actually included in the package. You have an array of red dots, another Thypoch design signature, distance scales for zone focusing. I have the aluminium version. It only weighs 281 grams. It's lighter and the color less smoky than a brass of my silver 50 Lux, which weighs 466 grams. The scalloped focus ring is a nice vintage touch, but unlike the 28 and 35 Simeras, this lens has a crescent-shaped focus tab rather than an old-school focus knob. This 50 doesn't have an infinity lock, a love it or leave it quirk on the 28 and 35 Simeras. There's a detent where you move the focus tab from 0.7 down to 0.45 meters, which gives you haptic feedback for losing rangefinder coupling. coupling, something all the Voigtlander lenses are missing, and I really like it. At launch, it's only coming in M mount, but this is the most adaptable mount, and unlike 28 or 35mm Semiras, infinity focus doesn't matter quite as much on a 50. The depth of field is so much narrower than wide-angle lenses even when you stop down to f8. I did some zone focusing on the street, and on my copy infinity focus lined up. Always double check adaptive lenses so you don't miss that moment. There is nothing in this world that does not have a decisive moment, but this moment almost didn't happen. Cartier-Bresson never wanted to write the essay because to him, it wasn't important. He had spent the past decade eschewing labels, grounding his surrealism with photojournalism bona fides, and in the end, his Magnum co-founder Kappa had to talk him into it. And that's how Images à la Sauvette, Images on the Run, very loosely translated as the decisive moment, came to be in 1952. If it brings you money, you'll spend it. If it brings you prestige, you can use it. These words from Kappa and the acclaim that followed for HCB would be his parting gift. Compared to the 28mm Simera, the 50 Simera has a different value proposition. Leica's 50 lux ASPH is the cheapest of the summer luxes. It's only 4,000 US brand new, it's crazy, as opposed to 8,000 US brand new, even crazier for the 28 Lux. There are also so many other 50 f1.4s already on the market. TT Artisan has an M-mount version that comes in at half the Thypoch price. It does have decent image quality, but the Thypoch is better, not to mention more robust build and smoother bokeh. Its closest competitor isn't Voigtlander's 50mm f1.2, but instead Voigtlander's 50mm f1.5. It's a great lens, sharp, well-controlled aberrations, but has no focus tab, the bokeh is less smooth, and if you add a hood, the whole package is even more expensive. If you're okay with a slower 50, there's even more options, including Thypoch's own vintage-inspired 50mm f2 Eureka or the well-corrected Voigtlander 50mm f2 Apo. So all these options make it harder for the 50 Simera to stand out. The first optical flaw that normally stands out in vintage-inspired lenses is chromatic aberration. If you're shooting indoors, the 50 Simera is very well controlled for CA. These trio of industrial light covers are usually a nightmare for CA and Leica, but if you expose properly, it looks very clean. When I shot the 50 Lux and the 50 Simera wide open, backlit, outdoors, can't help but blow out the background a little, and both lenses have fringing. In the out of focus branches, there are both green and purple fringing. There's more in the Simera than in the 50 Lux. In Lightroom, the defringe slider set to 5 gets rid of almost all the fringing in the 50 Lux. For the Simera, I needed to set the slider to 10. Regardless, both are correctable even under this type of torture test, which is more a testament to the 50 Lux than a knock on the Simera. The 50 Lux's optical design is over 20 years old. It still holds up against a lot of newer glass that I've tested under these punishing conditions. The Falling Soldier tells you everything you need to know about Robert Capa. It's contrasty, too close for comfort, yet he was fearless in capturing the emotion of the violence right there in the trenches. Capa died as he lived. Stepping on a landmine on assignment in 1954 meant he was struck down at the height of his glory. Cartier-Bresson had lost his friend and mentor, the one whose greatness he'd been chasing for as long as he could remember, and now all that was left was Capa's shadow. The third advantage of the 50mm Simera over the 50 Lux is not its price. It's how the images look when stopped down. The Simera has a rather astonishing 14 aperture blades compared to the 50 Lux's 9 or the newer 50 Lux's 12. At f2, the bokeh balls start to look hexagonal on my 50 Lux, but I don't see any hard edges on the Simera's bokeh until f5.6. f8. It's about here when you start to see sun stars for both lenses. I think they look pretty similar, not the best, not the worst sun stars, but at least they're there. If you're shooting group shots for an event when you have to stop down to f4 or f5.6 to get 2 rows of people in focus, the Simera will give you dreamier fall off, smoother bokeh than the 50 Lux. And by that point, the sharpness is about the same for these two lenses. So I think the 50mm Simera is a more versatile lens than the 50 Lux, especially when we consider the Simera's fourth advantage: consistency. The 28, 35, and 50mm Simeras all weigh about the same, all use 49mm filters, the same lens cap, the same lens hood. You can buy a complete set and share all the accessories to save space in your camera bag. Design language, image quality, all consistent across the lineup. I think Thypoch's biggest legacy is actually how these lenses work together as a team. Capa was gone, so HCB left Magnum. He had finally built a legacy, but his mentor wasn't around to see it. Last year, I lost my mentor. I'm still grappling with what that means. Did I lose my safety net? Or maybe it was never there to begin with. I hope my work can have a semblance of the same influence, but for now all I can do is keep shooting. I'm Jack, trying to capture the peace in every moment.